Hello and welcome to the Optimapharm podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Gary, and we're here today to talk all about accelerating global clinical development in Europe. And to do that, I'm joined by the absolutely brilliant Pavle Vukojevic, our Chief Medical Officer, and Nadia Saber, Senior Director of Feasibility at Optimapharm. How are you both?
Doing well, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Doing good.
Brilliant. Oh, it's so good to have you here. The sun is shining where I am. I hope it is for you too. So let's get stuck in then. Pavle, I'm going to come and start with you first. Now, when we say accelerating global clinical development in Europe, how are you defining these geographical regions and why are those differences important for clinical research?
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, I think it's very important to set up and define what we're talking about, especially geographically. You know, Europe has been going through many changes over the previous decades, and it's very critical for our audience to understand when we use certain terms. So starting with historical, a situation of having two big blocks of Western Europe and something that was called Eastern Europe, or more specifically Central Eastern Europe. As I say, it's a historical term. However, it is still in use, and people are still referring to that time. As we all know, now we have basically two groups of the countries in Europe, one represented with European Union and 27 member states, and the countries that we collectively refer to as outside of European Union or non-EU countries. And this second group of the countries is very heterogeneous. It starts with UK, we all know, since 10 years ago, not being part of EU anymore, from the far west, and then of course, Switzerland also not being part of EU, and then going east also countries in the Balkans, some of them are still not part of EU, and then further east, of course, far east in Europe, like Georgia or Moldova or Turkey also not being part of Europe. So what is common for these countries is that not being part of EU, they follow their own local regulations when it comes to clinical research, as opposed to EU that it has it all standardized and under the system called CTIS, where all the countries of EU and some of the short countries in Europe follow all together. So those are really the differences, and we will focus to some of these differences in our further elaboration of the current situation in Europe.
Yeah, that's super fascinating, Pavle. Thank you. And I wish we could do a history podcast with you. I feel like that would be really, really interesting. But I know we want to focus on the clinical research side of things and all about how our audience can accelerate them. So how can they achieve that, Pavle?
There are two main real areas to focus on, among the many others, but two are the main ones. One part of the speed of clinical research is related to the setup timeline. How much time do we need to get all the approvals and have, all the contracts signed and have the sites ready to be able to start the recruitment? And the other part is, of course, the recruitment capacity and the speed. How many patients can we get in certain country or certain site in the certain predefined, duration and the timelines agreed in advance? So just to touch on not going into too many details, but just to touch on the setup portion, as mentioned earlier, explaining the geographical split of EU versus non-EU. Nowadays, the EU countries and are expected to have a setup timeline somewhere around 5 to 6 months, and that is the time needed from the submission to the moment when the site is up and running, ready to enroll the patients, and that is simply something that is a little bit of limiting factor for all of the researchers. On the other hand, as mentioned earlier as well, the non-EU countries is a heterogeneous group. And, those countries all have their own local regulations and rules, how the clinical research is done and how the approvals are obtained. However, in general, it seems that overall, non-EU countries these days within Europe are faster than EU countries following CTIS. So just speaking in general and some average timelines that we follow, the quickest country that currently is available in Europe is Moldova. And we know that Moldova, under certain, provisions and, with a certain way of application, can be set up as quick as within 6 weeks. Then the other good example, maybe, Bosnia and Herzegovina, that comes at around 2 months total. The other countries like UK, 3 to 4 months, Serbia, 3 to 4 months, Georgia, 3 to 4 months as well. Still, all of those countries listed are somehow quicker than the standard CTIS timeline for setting up a study in an EU country.
Nadia, let's come to you. I'm keen to get your take. I know you've got some insights into the recruitment side of things.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So actually, when we are talking about feasibility, we are doing also this initial exercise with a classical approach, which is actually to assess the parameters such as the epidemiology, the standard of care, the patient pathway, the way the patient is managed actually for a given indication. We are also looking at the drug availability, the reimbursement within the country. And we are also assessing some, let's say, external parameters, which could be the country competition for this given indication. This is also giving us a good idea on the countries to select initially. There is also the regulatory environment, because depending on the drug, it could be that some countries are not suitable at all. And when we are entering in the site selection, it could be some specific equipment, etc. So they are it's a lot of parameters to consider when we are doing this exercise. And indeed, like mentioned by Pavle before, we can also see clearly a difference in Western European region countries. As an example, with when we are focusing on the big 5 EU countries, which are France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and UK, versus the other countries, as also mentioned by Palbe before, in the central EU region, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, North Macedonia, Serbia, and this for multiple reasons, or let's say several aspects. So we know that those countries could offer a better environment for clinical trials, such as they have larger access to suitable patients because they have much more treatment-naive patients, and obviously they have less competition. We know also that the PIs are more motivated. The staff is eager to contribute. They are highly qualified, GCP trained. So those are also some factors that we are considering. There is also the sites equipment. We could see also that some sites are even better equipped than some, let's say, Western European countries. There is also the centralized healthcare system that Pavle mentioned before. Actually, you are going to get maybe less sites, but you are going to reach to much more patients, because within those, let's say, 2 or 3 sites, you have access to 90% of the population. And to re-echo Pavle here, but yes, for example, this site, there is one site in Serbia which can do more than 100 beds in rheumatology. So this is really huge. And so if we want to illustrate that in terms of the saturation that we were highlighting before as well when comparing to the big 5 EU countries, so we did an exercise to look at the open and planned trials in oncology and in Europe, so in European region. And we can see clearly that in this diagram that you could see that the big 5 EU countries were, let's say, and remain the most crowded countries, especially. And this is true for several indications. So, and it's even, if we look at those data by extrapolating those to the population, it's even sometimes, it's even higher than what we have on the screen. For example, if we look at Belgium, it's 41 trials per million of people. So this is really huge. For, let's say, Belgium is a mid-sized country if we compare that to Germany or France, but they have the highest number of trials per million. Spain, we have seen in the past, let's say, years, that Spain is spanning for, let's say, everything in terms of indication. So this is also a good country to go, but on the other side, the competition is really high in this area. France and Italy are coming with 17 million per people. We have UK with 12 million and Germany, which is the biggest country in Europe with more than 80 millions of people. But comparing by doing this extrapolation is around 10 million, 10 trials per million. In terms of enrollment rate and recruitment, we also observe a higher recruitment rate in Central EU region compared to the big EU countries. Actually, it's something like 30 to 50% more for the reason that we evoked just before, such as less competition, more staff dedication, etc. So all those parameters are also contributor to this higher enrollment rate. So this is also something to have in mind and when selecting the countries, because at the end, it's true that the patient is at the middle of everything, and we would like also to that patients are taking benefit of the drug. Another example that we would like to highlight here is that we just wrapped a study where we made recruitment on time. As we went in some of those countries, such as Central EU region and non-cities countries, for that reason, and they had higher enrollment rate compared to the other countries. So we had among countries, we had Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Moldova, North Macedonia, and Serbia, and they recruited very well. So this is also something that we would like to highlight here.
And I hear that's incredibly rare, hitting the recruitment timeline.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's we're able to meet recruitment timelines thanks to those countries, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a great case study. Thank you so much, Nadia. And then Pavle, I guess it seems like there's sometimes skepticism about the trial quality in certain parts of Europe. I'd love to know what your experience has been, please.
Well, yeah, and you're right. You're completely right. Of course, if someone goes into the new region, new country for the first time to perform something as complicated and complex as a clinical research, there is always some level of, skepticism, as you say. However, at the beginning of every study, we sit down with our clients as Optimapharm, and we assess what is the best mix. And there are various reasons why some country should be in the mix or not, starting from the study itself. Is it doable in the first place, based on the standard of care needed or technology needed? And then, of course, based on the client needs and preferences, especially related to the timelines or sometimes a special relationship with certain investigators in certain countries. So we take all this into consideration, and then we look together really what will be the best solution. I've been in clinical research for 30 years now, and Optimapharm has been operating it more than 20 years in many of the countries that were mentioned with our own people. And we really know how good the quality data are coming from this region and these countries. And to assure our clients, and also as a part of our due diligence, going back to the same sites and same countries every time, we also follow the publicly available findings from the inspection that normally is done by authorities either locally or outside, like European Agency or FDA. And looking at these findings, I can with certainty say that these countries are at least as good as, in many cases, even better performing in quality than some of the standard countries that, will be the first one to cross someone's mind when it comes to clinical research. The reasoning behind this is I see as two-way reasoning. First of all, in these countries, there is still enthusiasm and dedication of the staff related to the clinical research. Also, availability of the local and of the site staff is more because there is less clinical research going on. And finally, I'm very happy to say that we are proud to have a very highly educated staff ourselves on the CRO side in Optimapharm. Many of our CRAs are either medics or having another scientific background appropriate. Again, being part of the reasoning for such a good quality of data. And finally, not the least important, but also the countries mentioned several times are coming with a lower cost for several reasons. One of the big reasons is, of course, the speed of the recruitment. The shorter the study is, the cost is the less. Then, of course, the CRO cost is less, just because of the situation is that the labor cost in the countries is less than in Western countries, for example. And finally, the direct cost related to the sites, fees, and all the other overheads is lower than in the, let's call it, Western countries.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Pavle. Hopefully all of those skeptics' minds have been completely changed. I know mine has. And if anyone listening would like to dive a little bit deeper into the regions discussed today, you can download the Beyond IRBS article by clicking the link in the episode description. But that's it for today, though. Thank you so much, Pavle and Nadia. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and goodbye.